Hello, and welcome to another episode of Profiles of Endurance. I'm Father Scott Vanderveer. Today's guest wishes only to give us her first name because she's going to share very frankly about what was a very difficult time in her life. The birth of a child is always a cause for joy, but when that birth is unexpected and comes in the middle of your high school career, when you're an only child from a family with great expectations for your future, the challenges for a young person are phenomenal. Lisa shares with us about the decision she made to keep that child and to raise him, and what it was like to be perceived by others after having made that choice. Her story goes on to meeting someone who she could share her life with, and then blending their two families together as one. She experienced life as an entrepreneur when what started off as a wild hair of an idea turned into a decade of her family's life. And then she talks about moving away from that stage of life to a completely new stage and about finding faith along the journey. This will be a special 2-episode conversation because the richness of what we shared is way too much for one sitting. So we ask you to settle in and listen to part 1 of this conversation with a fairly young woman still at this point in her life who's crammed about 3 lifetimes into her life so far and has no plans to stop anytime soon. Listen as she shares some of the most tender and intimate moments of her life with her pastor. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. And let's start back actually at the very beginning. Help us to get to know you a little bit by telling us a little bit about your family life and what faith was like growing up.
Okay, well, I am an only child. My mother and father were divorced when I was just a baby. So I was raised by my mother and my stepfather, both of whom were professional. They worked in technology on the banking industry, but on the technology side. So they worked together and they raised me. My stepfather was from a big Irish Catholic family. And my mother was, I don't think she was raised with any faith, but became engaged with a Presbyterian church at some point, and then became very active with them when I was very, very, very young. So she was the deacon at that church, and it was the church that my family went to. So, I grew up in a pretty normal household. We had a nice home in a nice, typical New Jersey suburban neighborhood. We went to church often, so my mother's involvement there had me there all the time. As a kid, I wasn't like a super devout child by any stretch of the imagination, but always had like a strong connection to the idea that God is good. When I think of my childhood, I have these like simple prayers I'm always reminded of when I think of that time. No prayers they teach you as like a little kid, like God is great, God is good, let us thank him for our food. It was like something you would say before snack time. But
I had that one too. That's my exact prayer. God is great, God is good, let us thank him for our food. And it always struck me that the great followed by the good was different than I would have written it. I would have said God is good, God is great, but of course it wasn't mine to write.
It's funny, right? And it's just like my knowledge and my memory of my relationship with God at that time was like so simple. It was just as simple as that prayer. It was, God is good. And when I would be scared at night, I would remember those simple little prayers or the Lord's Prayer. And I always just felt comforted by that. And I knew, the people in the church also gave me that same feeling. I definitely felt the community and the general goodness. So it was, like I said, it was simple for me when I was young. But as I grew older, I think I just kind of grew indifferent to it. It was like, I think as I got older, I started to, I don't know. I think maybe I craved excitement, and the church life felt a little boring to me. My close friends were definitely different than some of the kids I started to hang out with at school. I started to not want to be as engaged in the church activities and do more things outside of that. So it wasn't like there was anything that turned me. There was no, there was no contempt of any sort. It was just a growing indifference and this feeling of like that there might be something more exciting out there that I should be doing.
And it's interesting because listening to that very natural adolescent shift, I wondered if it was made a little bit more complicated by the fact that your mom was a deacon. Was there any pressure on you, or do you perceive any pressure on her to have a very churchy daughter during that time?
Yeah, there probably was for her. I don't think I was the kind of daughter that really considered too much of that. But no, I think I did feel it. Because as the pastor would be the leader of our youth groups, or, I definitely sensed that there was she had more of a relationship with them than some of the other parents. But like I said, being young, I don't know if I considered that too much, but she probably felt it more than I did.
Yeah. Well, and I know as a priest, I spend quite a bit of time consoling parents who have teenagers that are pulling away socially, emotionally, and spiritually. And I try to help them know that is very developmentally appropriate. And it's not necessarily a bad sign. It's, but it can be hard for the parent. But in addition to that shift, you also, in your teenage years, wound up having a very unexpected change in the course of your life. And that would be a big deal for anybody, and I think it's something we can really learn from. Do you mind chatting with us a bit about that unexpected change in your life?
Sure. So, I guess, what started as a natural tendency to want to gravitate towards more exciting things, just kind of progressed. I think, my whole high school years, I was really, my social life was the highest priority. I had a lot of friends. We did a lot of things. I hated being home. I hated being alone. It was always like, go, 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 go. Let's do this. Now when I look back at that time, I feel like I can easily see that I was, a typical kid looking for love and attention in all the wrong places. But at the time, it didn't feel like that. It felt like, it felt normal. I was there with all my friends. It didn't feel like I was so out of the ordinary to me then. But so long story short, at 17, just before my senior year of high school, I found out that I was pregnant. So that kind of dramatically changed the course of wherever it was I was going prior to that, and threw myself and my family into a whole different reality.
How long were you the only one to know that you were pregnant? What is that moment like to know, and how long do you keep that to yourself?
Not long. I think I told my friends right away. I think a good friend of mine, a girlfriend of mine, was involved in helping me find out. There was a moment of like, oh man, I think this is going on. And we find this out together, and then a moment of, oh man, I gotta tell my mom.
Yes.
So, not long, because I'm not the kind of person that likes to sit with emotion for a long time. I'd rather just get it over with. But, so I don't think there was a lot of time between me knowing for sure and me telling my mother. But then there was a little bit of time between the time that I, told her and the time that I knew which direction I was going to go based on where we were at.
Yes. Yeah. What kind of a response did you get talking to your mom?
Well, response is it's funny because I think, when I look back at it, I think that, naturally, you can't even control this. And I think regardless of your situation, I think at some level, every woman feels a little bit excited and happy when they find out that they're pregnant, even when you're in a situation like that. But
yes,
when you're in a situation like that and you're pregnant at 17, the world doesn't congratulate you. So, it's not the same experience. So, the first conversation, I think I pretty much could have written down the exact response that my mom had.
Yes.
So, that everybody kind of had a similar response. So I think, it was strange. Like, I think I felt this pressure of, like, I knew I had options, and I felt the pressure of, generally speaking, it felt like I was being pushed in the direction of not keeping the baby. But oddly, it was all, like, good-natured pressure. It was like, the adults in my life are telling me this because they fully understand the struggles that I'm going to face if I choose to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And my friends took more of an approach of, why would you ruin your life over this if you don't have to? And it was, it was always clear to me that it was my decision. It was, nobody forced me in any direction. But I think that generally I knew that that's where people were, were leading me.
Were you anguished by the decision? Or was there a point of real clarity? Or was it quite clear, or was it maybe never clear? I could understand that would be a really hard place to feel solid in when the consequences are so great in every direction.
Yeah, and again, this is only clear to me looking back on it now, but I think that there was a moment. I did not know. I was listening to everybody. I was feeling my own feelings. I was, progressing through this time period. And then eventually the time comes where you have to, your back is up against the wall and you've got to make a decision. So I was in a doctor's office. My mom brought me to a doctor, and I'm in the doctor's office, and the doctor is going over decisions and the choices that I have. And I think now when I look back on it, it was, being a child myself, even though I knew I had these options, my understanding of them was also very childlike. Because there was no way for me to really know in reality what any of these choices were going to lead to.
Yes.
So when I heard a doctor telling me what these options were, it became very clear to me what I wasn't going to do. So I think I had that moment of, like, I went into that office really having no idea how it was going to go. I kind of knew where my mother wanted me to land, or I thought I did anyway, and when I went in there and I talked to him, I just left knowing what I couldn't do. I didn't really understand what I had signed up to do, but I left there going, you know what? And those are not options for me. So this is the only one that's left, and this is what I'm doing. But did I know what I was doing? No, not really. And even if I had chosen another path, I didn't really know much about what that would be like either. So it was just, I think it was that very childlike connection to what's good and what's not good, and I just went with it. It was like, all right, this is bad, and this is better. So
Wow. And I'm realizing how much support you were in need of. Is there a way that all of us who love young women and want to be a support to young women, what can we do to help them at a time like that?
That's a really hard question, because, I could look back and say, if I had known some things that I know now, that decision may not have been what it was, so I don't know. Sometimes the things that aren't said are okay. What I mean? Sometimes it's, I don't know. I don't know if at that moment, I think it's hard to feel disappointment in people, but again, now as a parent, I can see why, why my parents would be disappointed, so I can't even say with real certainty that, being more supportive or not being disappointed or not, saying this, or I don't really know what what the right answer is, because it's just so, I don't know, maybe just help somebody, giving them the space to, I guess the best thing that happened for me was that I had the space to make that decision on my own. You know, as much as I could. And I don't know, I feel like all of the places that, you know, there was pressure, you know, it was appropriate. It was, you know, it was what it was.
Yeah. Wow. So you chose to have this baby, and you went through then the months of pregnancy. Talk to us a little bit about becoming a young mother. Were you 17 when he was born?
Yeah, so I was 17. I was just before my senior year of high school. So, you know, immediately what changed was I went to my senior year of high school. I went to the first day. I thought maybe I could be that person that, you know, there was one other girl in my high school who walked the halls visibly pregnant at one point in time while I was there. I don't even recall her name, but I do remember it happening. In my mind, I thought maybe I could do this. But I got there on the first day, and my mind was not, it was so apparent to me that, like, I cannot do this. I cannot sit in these rooms and, like, pretend like this is not going on and focus. You know, I can't. So I immediately just walked down to the guidance counselor and told them my situation and asked for some options. So I had already, I was a decent student. You know, I was, socially active. I wasn't a great student at the time, but I was where I needed to be and maybe a little further along. So I really didn't have a lot of classes that I had to take.
Yeah.
Remember, I had to take, you know, like maybe 2 classes and an elective. So she recommended that I just do that in night school, and I would be able to complete the requirements that, you know, the state had, get my diploma actually early. And you know, that would be it. That was, you know, that was my senior year. So I you know, didn't drop out. I finished, you know, through their night school program.
Wow.
And I did that at night. I got a job during the day. I worked at a flower shop during the day. It's my first time as, like, a young person being involved with adults during the day.
Oh, yes.
It was funny. I got a job at a flower shop, and you know, it was different. I remember I didn't want anybody to know I was pregnant. I happened to be pretty, like, small framed at the time. So I just wore, you know, there weren't any cute maternity clothes. I wore big baggy shirts and sweatpants. And I remember one of my last days of working a deli that I had ordered lunch from every day. You know, I had told him this was my last day. And he's like, "Oh, what's going on? What happened? You get fired?" And I said, "No, you know, actually I'm, like, you know, 9 months pregnant. I'm about to have a baby." He had this funny, like, "What?" You know, so, I mean, I think I hid it pretty well. I didn't really tell anybody. It was kind of you know, it was like, just, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I'm doing. You know, I'm going to work. I'm going to go to school at night, and I'm going to have this baby. So my son was born in March. Of, you know, what would have been my senior year. I obviously didn't go to a prom or do any of that stuff. So,
wow.
I spent the spring with an infant while my friends were, you know, completing their senior year. And then, you know, the next, like, that whole time period probably was rough. You know, you had us, like, just in general, it was, that was probably the hardest time. You know, it's like when I think back on it, I just remember early on. So from the time that you know, you have no way to hide something like that. Even with big baggy clothes, like, it's there. So there's, like, a visible sign that you have you know, that you have a baby. And I looked really young, so people would always stare at me. I would get looked, and, you know, like, people aren't very good at hiding disgust on their face when they, not that it's always disgust, some level of, like, disapproval or shame on you, or, oh my God. So that started probably while I was physically pregnant, and then after that, you have a baby with you. So the same thing continues. You know, you physically have a visible sign that says to everybody, you know, you're different than other girls your age. So I think that, like, you know, I remember even in the hospital, like, my birthing experience is not, like, none of these experiences are the happy, joyous moments that they are for people when they have have children in normal circumstances. You know, the doctors were generally condescending, you know, the nurses same, you know, there was always a feeling of like, you know, lack of confidence or some kind of judgment about, you know, my lifestyle. You just kind of always felt this pressure. And then with the baby thing, like I remember being, you know, out on playgrounds and was often assumed to be a nanny. And people would talk to me fine when they thought I was a nanny, but if somehow it came out that I was the mother, it was like a totally different tone. And
wow.
Change of gear would happen. And, you know, so you just had a lot of experiences like that. And I think, you know, it fractured me in a way that I just didn't even give credit to at the time. But it really did make me feel like there was really no path to wholeness. You know, I was not a family. I didn't have, you know, my son's father was not in the picture. It was always me from the beginning. My parents became very supportive, but it's different. You know, there's always, you know, as a parent, I understand this now, but there's always a feeling of like support, but it's wrapped in fear, right?
Oh.
Is she going to do it? Is, you know, what's going to happen next? You know, so I think I got a real strong dose of that coming from every angle. And, you know, it really motivated me in a way. It terrified me, but it motivated me like I've never been motivated before. It was like, you know, I cannot become a statistic. I cannot let these people, you know, think that, like, become what all these people think I'm going to become. So I just decided that was just not going to happen. So I enrolled in community college. And I started, so my son was born in March. I enrolled over the summer, and I started in fall. So at the same time, all of my other friends who were, you know, I would have graduated with were in college. I did as well. So I ended up, I went to, so during that time, I did 2 years of community college. I had a babysitter for my son for the 2 days that I would go to school. I put all my classes into 2 days, and then I would be home with him for the other 3 days. I did really well there. I pursued school like, you know, like I said, I had something to prove, and I just kind of went for it, and it gave me an outlet. So, you know, but it was funny. It was like I had different stages, you know, so I had my home life, which is where I was having, you know, all my first with this baby, you know, it was sleepless nights and teething, and, you know, my parents were kind of like sharing that experience with me. And then I'd go to school, and at school I would be somebody totally different. And it was like, I really, like I said, this is where like the fracture thing comes up. I really loved being at school because the baby wasn't with me.
Yeah.
So it was like, you felt a little guilty, but honestly, what ended up happening is I didn't share that part of my life with anybody. When I was there and I saw, and people, like, I'd have professors. This is a crazy story. I had a professor that I got really close to. He was a great mentor to me. He was a literature professor. And I just, you know, we just connected so much so that he asked me once if I would babysit for his daughter, who was at the time 30-something, and had 2 kids. And I said yes. And then I go home and I tell my mom, I was like, Mom, you got to watch Stone for me because I get to go babysit, you know, like, and I still didn't have the courage to tell him that I had a baby at home myself. You know, it was like, I couldn't bring myself to see, like, eventually I did. Eventually I gave him to him because we were close. But I just, like, in my mind, I, like, didn't want to have that moment when somebody looked at me and saw this, like, great student who with so much potential, then that, you know, see disappointment in them. I just didn't want to. So I didn't share that.
Lisa, I think that you are blowing a lot of our minds, mine included, because I am so grateful for your willingness to share the feeling of fracture. The reason I think a lot of us are amazed at this, and we're hearing something maybe for the first time, is that most of the listeners listening to this are very likely to be Catholic people who are part of a very strongly pro-life church, one that, you know, advocates for life choice in every juncture, from the womb to the tomb. And I think I remember having a thought related to what you're telling us, and that is when I taught Catholic high school, there was occasionally in the mid 2000s, the mid aughts, that first decade of the 2000s when I was teaching there was occasionally a pregnant teenage girl, and I remember thinking that that there were probably many other young people who were connected to pregnancy, but because of different choices, we never knew that. And so they never incurred any kind of judgment. And yet, though we were a pro-life school and a pro-life people, there was some of what you're describing, the whole, well, why did she let that happen? And, you know, why is her lifestyle that? And so I guess I'm just really struck by you saying that from the doctors to the nurses to the there was a real culture of you should be ashamed for this having happened. Maybe it's devoid from the issue of choice. Rather than being celebrated for the choice you made, it almost was as if people's interest wasn't in the life choice, it was in the circumstance that could have led to it. Even though it's the oldest story in the human family. I mean, this is not hard to understand at all. Anyone who has been a teenager or knows teenagers understands perfectly how things can happen. What I think all of us are scratching our heads listening to this going, we really are missing the ball on how to support young women in crisis situations. We put you were in a very hard position, especially because, Lisa, you were set up until this time this happened. You were a good student who was fit and was from a middle class, maybe upper middle class family in a good neighborhood at a good school. You were winning at life. Yet you were looked at and treated as somebody because of this choice you made for screwing up your life.
It's almost interesting that you say that, because I think sometimes, some of that even led to more of the pressure, right? So I think sometimes there was, again, like having that background and that upbringing, the expectation was that I would turn out a lot different, So it was like that this option happening now was not ever part of anybody's, it was not good. There was not too much that was good. I mean, I think, like I said, my ultimately it turned out well. I think when my parents got over the shock of it, I mean, there's nobody in the world I think they love more than my son. But it's still, like I said, it was hard for everybody, I think, to fully support it. And with the whole heart and soul. I don't think and I didn't realize that you don't realize this until you have a different experience. You know what I mean? I don't even, again, you don't know what you don't know. So at the time, it wasn't really, I felt the pressure and I felt the stigma for sure, but I didn't know exactly how different it could be.
Yes. It's a fascinating glimpse. You're really being generous to give us a glimpse into that. Wow. And I just think all of us, I think I'd like to take a second and just say to the listeners, if you are as shocked at hearing this firsthand as I am, what could we do differently for today's young women that are carrying children? For those of us who have watched things like the MTV show Teen Mom and drawn whatever conclusions we've drawn from watching a reality show like that, what is it that we could do that could be more loving, more supportive, more understanding? Because, I think we could all agree that it is rare to meet teenagers who are really good at resisting the temptation to look for love in the wrong places, wherever those places are. I think we all know that most teenagers fall into some trap of stumbling as they're learning to walk into adulthood. But to have somebody be treated like, as long as we don't know that you've got any struggles or any kind of conflict going on in your growing up, we can support you and be standing there to applaud you as you walk into your future. But if something occurs that doesn't follow the plan that society really celebrates, you'll know it. You'll know it in a major way over and over again. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
It's funny as you were saying that. You know what you can do that's really specific, and this would have just been like, if I could have anything to advise anybody on, the most atrocious thing, or the most irritable thing that I think would happen to me all the time is, immediately after somebody would see me with my son, I'd say, once we got over the fact that I wasn't the nanny and I was the mother, that they would, the very next thing out of their mouth was always, "How old are you?" And
wow.
Immediately, it was like the judgment was just like right there. It wasn't like, it was usually almost always like that. And I mean, to this day, I hate being asked how old I am for any reason because of that. It was just like, a really weird question. You would never ask that to anybody unless you felt entitled. If you felt better than they were in some way, like you would never ask a woman how old she is in general. Like, that's just kind of rude, right? All the time.
Yes.
In that situation, no one ever felt like it was rude. They just felt like, I have every right to ask you this. Clearly, for what reason, I don't know, but it was a constant, and it drove me berserk.
Wow. If we could just not ask, how old are you, we would be treating those mothers with a lot more respect.
Right. It's a simple thing, because it really does not matter. It really does not matter to the stranger we're encountering for this, moment. It's just a nice way of them letting me know how they feel.
You know what I thought you were going to say? I appreciate hearing that, and it's different than I thought. I thought as you were starting to speak that you were going to say offer to babysit. Did you get offers?
No, because I think most of the time people would assume, most of the time the young mother guy, I felt like they didn't think I was a good mother, and you didn't have that time to build that kind of relationship with them and those quick encounters. Most of the encounters you're having as a mother, like I said, you're out and about, you're doing a story time, or you're at a playground or whatever. I didn't have a lot of friends. When I did connect with, I was so much younger than all those moms. Those moms weren't like reaching out to me to try and be my friend. Once I did, maybe I can pinpoint one or two people at that time that, I would call friends that had children. They were obviously like 12, 15 years older than I was sometimes. But, once people knew me, they would think, I would be worthy of babysitting their children. But most people were just judging me as somebody who was irresponsible.
Oh, Lisa, I'll tell you, an amazing workout for spiritual humility. I mean, I just feel like you were given the opportunity to live two different lives. The life before becoming a mother, where you were this upwardly mobile, young, good student and athlete, and then you became somebody who people felt entitled to say made bad choices and was a bad mother. Wow. It's remarkable. I think you're giving us such an important glimpse into this. And actually, I'd like to jump ahead, not to tell more of the story out of season, but to just say that as listeners are listening to this, they'll discover that you have gone on in time to wind up working for the church. And I'd like to go back to that moment, because there was a moment when you came in for your interview. You were a candidate that found the posting online and submitted your resume online. And so we did not know you personally when you came into an interview to work for a church. At one point, there was an interview question offered to you, and one of the interviewers asked, what is an example of a time that you faced a particularly hard challenge and found ways to overcome it? And you very generously shared that you had a child your senior year of high school, and that you figured it out and managed to go to college and then go on to get a master's in business administration, and you went on. And as you spoke, I was so impressed by that and everything else you said in the interview. But when you walked out and we started to debrief the interview, one of the interviewers said, "Did you hear her say that she had a child her senior year of high school. She said, that is someone who can do anything. She's our woman. She's the one who is going to work for this church, because that is a person who can handle any challenge. And I thought I understood. Up until talking to you today, I thought I understood how true that was. I now have a whole new level of respect for how true that was. I figured it meant that you're a good time manager and you were good at dealing with the unexpected. And no. It's much more than that. Wow, Lisa, thank you. Thank you for generously sharing these parts of that season with us. It's a big deal. And I think it's important now for people to know that this story develops beautifully, because later, now we're 20 years further down the road, and you have found a wonderful life partner, your husband, Don, and you actually have blended a family. He too had children from a first marriage, and you had your son, and now together you have blended your families and had another daughter who is a delight. How did you find your way into blending these two families with all of the complications that come with that?
Carefully. I think slowly. It's I think blending families is it's a term now, but it's funny because it no matter what, it always starts with broken, right? There's something broken. Blending something that was once something else, it's in that sense it was we had to reshape what family looked like for our kids and for our children. And I think during the beginning stages of that, it was really difficult. I used to think to myself, like, I wouldn't actually call my worst enemy. It was really hard, a lot of emotions, a lot of things going on. But ultimately, I think my husband and I always knew that the love we had for each other was special, and it was worth taking all of these risks for. And we just kind of knew that if we held on to that we would have enough to get the kids to where they needed to be, and it was just really, I think, clinging to that and always trying to strive for the, just focusing on that love for the kids and, keeping it as simple as you can during those complicated times. But it's not easy. I think we succeeded by just doing that, loving them all equally.
Wow. And what are the ages now? Starting with your son, is the oldest of the kids. Is that right? He's how old now?
So he's 22. And then my husband's kids from his first marriage are now 19, 16, and 14. And Willow is 10.
Oh, that's a big family. It's a big undertaking. And I'm so grateful that you said that a blended family starts with some sort of situation that's broken. Because I think that's the whole reason that this series exists. Profiles of Endurance exists so that we can figure out what to do with the parts of life that aren't fitting together right, and have the patience and the virtue to see things through, to tend them. So I know that I'm going to take a lot from having you say, slowly, carefully, awkwardly, not easily, we blended these families. It took a lot. But it was the specialness of the love that you share with your husband that made it worth the effort. And yeah, it's amazing, because that specialness really has been tested in a lot of different ways, because I can't imagine. It's funny to imagine how different it is. The two of you at one point worked at a corporate food environment. You were both working for this organic food outfit in the management of that. You wound up then with your blended family completely changing the course of your careers. And it's something that is kind of magical. I almost feel like for anybody who ever saw the movie Dirty Dancing, they have like a bit of a glimpse into what your life might have become like in a certain amount. Anybody who's seen that movie that knows it's about summertime, summer camp, and like the old-fashioned tourist culture in the Catskills of upstate New York. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you reinvented your whole career and in a way that required your family to live in such a different kind of existence?
Yeah. So it was, like I said, at some point, my husband and I met at work, and we were happy. At this point, we were married, and we got married, and we had a baby, and we were, successful and enjoyed that company and that work. But I think, because of his first marriage and my, experience as a single mother with my son, it was, having our daughter together felt so different than, anything before. And for me, it just became really clear that I didn't want to leave her. I didn't want to have to put her in daycare all the time to maintain my my career. It just I didn't really get a chance to enjoy what it was like to be a mother, and I really wanted that. And my husband had the same sense of adventure, I guess, of like let's do something else. And it was funny because it started on our honeymoon. We had a fleeting thought on a plane on our honeymoon of which we did it at Mount Rainier in Washington. We went backpacking, and we were just like, wouldn't it be awesome to run a little place, cabins in the woods like this, so you could live in one of these places all the time and just get to be here. And it was like a fleeting thought. But then we went back to, back home, back to work, and, almost a year goes by, I guess, before we decided to start to just have a thought. A thought popped in, wait, why don't we just do that? Can we do that? Can we just do that? Would that be possible? You know what I mean? It was just and, the thought quickly turned into some internet searches, and searches turned into some real properties. And we knew that my husband's kids were living with their mother, and they would see us, every other weekend and vacations and holidays and stuff like that. So we had that arrangement with them. So we knew we couldn't go too far. We needed to be within a distance of where we could still maintain that relationship with them. So we looked at a map, and we just kind of drew a circle, and we said, where's the greenest spot in that circle? And it was the Catskills. So we started to hone in that area. And like I said, with internet searches, just picked up some properties and said, it's can we do this? Should we do this? And we just kind of fell in love with the idea of, doing something for ourselves and being able to have our family be part of that and not have to, be on somebody else's timeline all of the time. So we did it. We did it amongst a lot of people telling us not to. We were in a very good position where we were, and it was thought of at craziness. Why are you walking away from this? But we did it anyway, and we bought a little place in Wyndham. In the Catskills. It was an old restaurant and cottages that were there, and owner's residence. So it was an old property. The main building itself was over 100 years old. The cabins were built in the 60s. House, same 50s, 60s. So it was older. It needed some work. There was nothing really going on there when we got there. We bought it from a family who owned it for 50 years. I've come to find out this is a common Catskill story. Family, at some point the generation gets, third, fourth generation gets tired, and the business must be sold. So there was no business there when we bought it. It was essentially just, so it was barely a pulse left in it. So we said, why not? Let's give this a shot.
Why not? Let's give this a shot. That with a phrase like that, the next part of the story is either really inspiring or really hair-raising. Do you want to know which it is? Well, you'll have to stay tuned for next week. Join us next week when we go to part 2 of this conversation with Lisa, as she talks about entrepreneurship, about knowing when to make the shift that your life is calling you to, and about finding faith. All of those things are still a part of her story. So we hope that you'll join us next week. May God bless you.